Hello, everyone. This is Maria Agope from SK Ghost Associates, and I would like to welcome all of you to our today's webinar on Chapter 7, Fire and Smoke Protection Features. Our speaker today is Mr. Kevin Scott. While he's presenting, please type in your questions in time just in the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and the questions will be addressed by Kevin at the end of his presentation. The chat box will serve as our Q&A box, and only Kevin and I will see the questions submitted in there. Also, you should have received the PDF handout of this webinar. Having a printed copy of that will facilitate your note taking during the webinar. With that, Mr. Kevin Scott, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Maria, and good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today. We are going to just a quick background. I am Kevin Scott. I worked for Kern County for 30 years. Then I worked for ICC for 8 years, and now I'm just getting to do the fun stuff like training. So I have been involved in code development since 1988. So if we have questions, please feel free to answer them. If we don't get to all the questions, you will get a response via email after the training's completed. But we're doing Chapter 7 and the building code, and we have a lot of information to cover. There's a lot of things in Chapter 7. And there we go. So, and we're going to start with firewalls, but Chapter 7 covers fire resistant rated construction and smoke barriers, smoke partitions, which is not, we won't call it smoke resistant, but it just limits the transfer of smoke. It's not a complete, it's just a complete, a solid containment for the transfer of smoke. But we're going to start with firewalls. Fire resistant rated wall having protected openings restricts the spread of smoke and fire and extends continuously from foundation to or through the roof, with sufficient structural stability under fire conditions to allow collapse of either side without collapsing of the wall. That is the one, that structural stability is the one significant difference between a fire wall and a fire barrier. Fire barrier is going to come down when the roof collapses. Fire wall is intended to remain upright to continue to provide the separation. So when we put a firewall in a building, it used to be up until the current code that you are in. It used to be that when we put a firewall in a building, we treated them as completely separate buildings, however they were attached by that one wall. 2020 LA Building Code says that the firewalls only serve to create separate buildings when you are considering the building height, the building area, or the type of construction. So those are the uses for a firewall. There's one other use for a firewall that appears in the fire code and in the building code in chapter 4, section 414, when you are considering control areas for hazardous materials. We will treat areas on each side of a firewall as a separate building. So I could have 4 control areas on each side of that firewall. They have to have structural independence. They need to stay up. And when I place a firewall on a property line, often done at a mall, the party wall can have no openings in it. However, if it is in a mall, the party wall can have openings in it. But any party wall, which is a firewall on a lot line, Any party wall other than at a mall can have no openings in that firewall. So what's the rating of the firewall? The fire resistance rating, is based on the occupancy classification that you're separating. What's on one side versus what's on the other side. And if they come up with a different rating, I've got an S2 and I've got an F1. It requires a 3-hour firewall. It requires a 2-hour firewall. Guess what? We go with the 3-hour. We go with the 3-hour firewall. Footnote A comes into play sometimes often when I have type 2 or type 5 construction. Wall shall be permitted to have a 2-hour fire resistance. We find that footnote here. In the big laundry list of occupancies, A, B, E, some H, I, R occupancies, 3-hour firewall separation required. However, if it's type 2 or type 5 construction, it can be reduced to 2-hour. Firewalls are required to be of non-combustible construction, except in a type 5 occupancy. And yes, I can build type 5. Let's go type 5. I'm doing wood frame, and I need a 3-hour firewall. I can build a 3-hour firewall with wood studs and sheetrock. I can build a 4-hour firewall with wood studs and sheetrock. But if it's in anything other than type 5 construction, it has to be completely non-combustible material. So when I'm looking at using a firewall in a facility, I've got multiple occupancies here. And I can look at that firewall right there, separating this portion of the building from this portion of the building. And when I go back and look at this table, I have a M occupancy, I have a F1 occupancy, F1, and I have a B occupancy, B. Both say 3. So I need a 3-hour firewall between a group B and group M. Group B says, I need 3 hours. Group M says, I need 3 hours. So I've got a 3-hour firewall. Once I do that, we treat each of these when we're evaluating the allowable area. We treat them as a separate portion. What's the allowable area of this building? It would be based on how many square feet, type of construction, whatever frontage is available, minus this portion here, and increase for sprinklers. And we would treat them all separately. When I'm separating a building for construction, same thing. I've got a different type of construction here. Type 1B for this I2, type 2A for this R2.1, and type 5A. I've got different types of construction. If I was to do this without separating the building with firewalls, I would have to treat the whole building as type 5A, because it's the least fire resistance of the building. I don't want to do that because my areas are too restrictive. So I'm going to separate the type of construction between a I2 and what do we have? Oh, sorry, I forgot. I2 R2.1, I2I R2.1. I get 3 hours, 3-hour firewall. R2.1 and B. R2.1 and B occupancy. It says 3 hours also. However, footnote A says I can reduce it to 2 hours with type 2 or type 5 construction. It's type 2A and 5A, 2-hour firewall. When I'm looking at firewalls for sprinklers, I'm not creating 2 separate buildings. I'm creating 2 separate fire areas. 2 separate fire areas when we're looking at sprinkler requirements. 2 separate fire areas, 1 building. So we look at the entire area for the building. Firewalls designed to separate a building for sprinkler requirements. Firewalls creating fire areas. Still not creating a separate buildings, but I'm creating fire areas in an A2, A3, E, F1 woodworking facility, and M occupancy. The firewall in those occupancies, in order to consider it a separate fire area, has to be 4 hours with no openings. With no openings. So I can't have openings, even though I protect the openings, I can have no openings in that wall. For fire alarm, when I'm looking at fire alarm compliance, basically, I just ignore firewalls and I have one separate building. Fire alarms do not create separate buildings. So I look at the entire building when I'm looking at firewalls within a building when I'm considering is a fire alarm required. Structural stability. We mentioned the definition requires structural stability so that when we have a fire on this side of the building and this roof collapses, the wall stays in place. The wall stays in place. So it's built differently. The attachments to this wall are different so that when this roof comes down, this can pull away from that wall without pulling the wall down. It's different. So sometimes it becomes structurally difficult. An option that's in the code. I build 2 walls back to back. To get a 4-hour firewall, I would build 2 walls. This one's 3-hour rated. This one is 3-hour rated also. The only connection is a rain cap at the top. And I can do that. This roof collapses. This wall comes down with it. I still have a 3-hour firewall remaining. So this is allowed in the code. It's designed to allow easier construction methods because now it's my attachment here is easier. This wall can support that load and be attached to that load. And when this roof comes down, this wall comes down with it. Okay, it comes down with it. I still have a fire rated wall remaining for the other portion of the building. When I'm doing light frame construction in a seismic zone D through F, and yes, that's correct, the higher seismic design areas, but it's lightweight construction, I can have a 3/4 inch thick piece of sheeting connecting one building to the other, one side of the firewall to the other. This is for structural purposes. And yeah, it'll tear away. It'll tear away when this one side comes down, but the other wall will stay in place. Maximum thickness 3/4 inch. But it's there to allow the structure to be designed structurally for a seismic activity. Firewall. The only fire rated construction that is required to extend above the roof is a firewall. Not required for a fire barrier, fire partition, not required. Firewall has to go 30 inches above the roof. If my roof is sloped more than 2 and 12, that 2 and 12, we will consider it a flat roof. More than 2 and 12, then I have to look at what's the dimension, what's the height 4 feet away from that wall. And whatever that height is, that's where my 30 inches starts. So I come out to that elevation, add 30 inches, that's the top of my firewall. That's the top of my firewall. Not always required that the firewall extend above the top of the roof. There are some other options. There are some other options. Here's one. I can have a 2-hour firewall, maximum 2-hour firewall, stop at the underside of the roof sheeting. If I've got a building where the roofs are the same height, and again, up to 2 and 12, we're going to consider them both flat. And we can do that, but it may be sloping towards each other. That's okay. And the roof assembly within 4 feet of the firewall is constructed as 1-hour construction. No openings within the 4 feet. So I've got an 8-foot path, firewall centered in that 8-foot path where no openings allowed, and the entire roof structure, the roof covering on the roof, is Class B or better. And I can stop at the roof sheeting. I can also terminate the firewall after roof sheeting if the roof is non-combustible. Non-combustible roof, I still have no openings within 4 feet of the firewall on either side, and the roof covering has to be at least Class B. There is no limit where the one we just looked at had a maximum 2-hour firewall. This one, now I have a non-combustible roof. Now it could be a 3-hour firewall or 4-hour firewall that I stop at the roof structure. In type 3, 4, or 5 construction, I can terminate again at the roof if the 4-foot separation on, or 4-foot distance on each side of the firewall is 1 hour, or fire retardant treated wood, or I've added 1 layer of 5/8 type X sheetrock on the underneath side. It has to go at least 4 feet to a framing member. So if my joists are running perpendicular to the firewall, I cover the entire bottom of that roof. If my joists are parallel to the firewall, I can go out to whichever one is just beyond the 4-foot dimension and stop at that point. Initially, we talked about the firewall going from foundation up to or through the roof. There is one exception to that. In pedestal construction, where I have a 3-hour assembly, the use below that level is any occupancy other than group H, and the use below that pedestal is of type 1A construction, and it's sprinklered. I have a 3-hour pedestal construction, my horizontal assembly here, 3-hour rating, and I can install my firewall from that pedestal up to or through the roof. This is allowed. This restriction here, uses above group A, B, M, S, or R, that's a restriction based on the pedestal construction requirements. But my firewall can start, does not need to go down below through this 3-hour horizontal assembly. The firewall in a stepped building where the roof is stepped, I've got different levels of roof structure. The basic requirement is that I have my 30-inch parapet above the lower roof, and then beyond that, for an additional 15 feet above the lower roof, I have a 1-hour wall with, I can have openings, but they're protected with a 3/4 hour opening protective, or no openings. Let's go back to that one. But this firewall, I've shown it here extending above this roof, not required, not required. I have to have the 15 feet, but above the ceiling, the roof above is not required. The firewall can terminate, same thing, at the underside of the roof sheeting in my stepped building again. If I go out 10 feet, when we protect it on both sides, we went 4 feet on either side, on both sides. Now we're protecting only on one side, on the lower roof side. We go out 10 feet with 1 hour construction, or the entire span of the roof if it is, they're running perpendicular to the roof structure. I protect that with no openings. No fire resistance required for this portion of the wall here at all. Can I have openings on a firewall? Some, yes. If it's a party wall, no. Other than at a covered mall. But I'm going to have openings for doors, forklift operation, ductwork. I can have openings, provided that I protect the openings with an opening protective. My duct and air handling openings, go to section 717. We'll talk a little bit about that. Other openings, my doors, my glazing, maximum 156 square feet each opening, not per the whole wall, each opening. But then we look at what's the aggregate width of the openings in that entire firewall, and cannot exceed 25% of the length of the wall. Openings are not limited to the 156 square feet where both sides are sprinklered. And this is, and you will find several occasions in chapter 7 where it says you're sprinklered, but it has to be NFPA 13 sprinkler design. Cannot use 13R to get some of these provisions. So I've got my firewall, I've got a 4-hour firewall. I need a 3-hour opening protective. 3-hour opening protective and a 3-hour wall, 1.5 hours and a 2-hour wall. So that would be my doors, glazing, whatever it may be. So here as an example, we're going to look at a firewall. I've got a firewall that is 60 feet in length, 12 feet high. So my wall length is 60 feet. Each opening has to be less than 156 square feet. And then we have to look at what's the aggregate width. I can have a maximum of 25% of that wall. So I have a 25% would be 15 feet. I've got a 3-foot by 7-foot fire door, gives me a width of 3 feet. I've got a ventilation louver. It's a 2 feet high by 4 feet wide. I have 4 feet in width. I have a fire door, vertical fire door, 8 feet wide, 10 feet high. It's below the 156 square feet. It's 80 square feet. But we look at the width. Doesn't matter that it's taller than it is wide. What's the width? 8 feet wide. I've got a total of 15 feet. Those openings are allowed in my firewall. They are protected. So it's a fire door. It's a fire rated rolling door. There's a damper located in the louver. So when I put my damper in there, it has to have a damper. And depending on the firewall rating, it's either 1.5 hours for a 2-hour wall or 3 hour for a 3 or 4 hour wall. Fire dampers only come in 2 ratings, 1.5 hour and 3 hour. So it has to be one of those two. So if I had a 1 hour wall, I need a fire damper in it. I have to have a 1.5 hour fire damper. because there is nothing less than that. Fire barriers are next step down in fire resistance. Fire barrier, basically designed to do the same thing as a firewall, however, not required to remain standing. The roof comes down, so does the wall. Okay, that's the way it is. That's the way it is. So those are my fire barriers. I use fire barriers, or they are required when I'm separating certain uses or portions of the building. Incidental use areas, occupancy separations. I'm creating fire areas. I'm protecting an atrium. I'm constructing control areas for hazardous materials. I'm constructing exit passageway or a exit shaft. Any of my exits, I'm looking at fire barriers. Fire barriers. Could I use a firewall to construct an exit? What is one wall of an exit passageway? Sure. It's a higher level of protection than a fire barrier. But the fire barrier would be the minimum. So here's just an example. We aren't going to go through all these, but just an example of incidental uses that need to be protected in a building. An incidental use is an operation or a function or a piece of equipment in a building that creates a higher level of hazard than the group B occupancy with the furnace room with over 400,000 BTUs. It's a higher hazard, and we're just going to protect that area. We're going to protect that area. So I need 1 hour fire barrier or sprinkler system. Either one will work. So I could use fire barriers in this situation. Sometimes it's 1 hour fire barrier. Sometimes it's a 2 hour fire barrier. Sometimes it's a fire barrier and sprinklers. It all depends on what the hazard is and what occupancy we're located in. Separation of occupancies. Separating occupancies is a designer choice. I either build I've got a, let's see, what we're going to take. We're going to take a occupancy and an M occupancy. They're in the same building. So we have an A occupancy and an M occupancy. As the designer has a choice: either build the entire building to comply with A occupancy requirements and the entire building to comply with M occupancy requirements, or separate the occupancies. If I don't separate them with fire rated construction, and if one of them exceeds 10% of the entire floor area, I have to provide, design it as a whole building complies. So when I'm looking at this table between an A and an M, I have two options: S, sprinklered, and S, not sprinklered. And that would be both sides of that fire barrier. If it's sprinkled on both sides, it's a 1 hour rating. Then eliminate the rating, 1 hour rating. It's not sprinklered on both sides, or it's only sprinklered on one side, or it's sprinklered with NFPA 13 R. I consider that not sprinklered. I need a 2 hour separation. I'm creating fire areas. When I'm using fire areas, firewalls, horizontal assemblies to create fire areas, I have another table that deals with the rating required on that. Again, based on the occupancy classification. And I've got an, let's see, for I've got to pick one that I don't have to have a 4 hour separation. I've got an S1 occupancy. And I'm going to create fire areas in the S1 occupancy, separating S1, S1, S1. all separated into 3 fire areas, that requires a 3-hour fire barrier to do that. So when can I use a 1-hour wall to create a fire area? The only time that applies is in group U. Everything else to create a fire area requires 2-hour or more fire barrier. The fire barrier. Fire wall went from foundation to or through the roof. Fire barrier starts from the top of the floor ceiling assembly below. So even here, second floor ceiling assembly below. Now it has to be a fire rated floor ceiling assembly to create a complete separation from one side to the other. But I start from there. I don't have to go to the foundation. Where do I terminate? I go to the underneath side of the floor sheeting or floor assembly, if there's a floor ceiling assembly above, or roof sheeting or ceiling above, a floor slab, or even a roof slab. I go to the underneath side. No penetration through. I can go to the underneath side of these assemblies. Any construction supporting a fire barrier. Here's my construction supporting a fire barrier, which would include this horizontal assembly, this wall supporting the horizontal assembly, this wall supporting the horizontal assembly, maybe even this wall. But any construction supporting a fire barrier has to have at least the same rating. Has to have at least the same rating. Option is that supporting construction for 1-hour fire barriers for incidental uses in type 2B, 3B, 5B construction. This only applies to incidental uses. Does not have to be fire resistance rated. So I could have up on the 3rd floor just walls separating that incidental use from other portions of that floor area. Can I have openings in that fire barrier? Yes, I can. And this is table 716.1, number 2. And this is just a portion of that table, but this is the table we go to. It says, okay, and it gives all of the options for my fire rated separations or fire rated construction. Firewall, fire barriers with a fire resistance rating of 1 hour or more than 1 hour. Okay, I've got a 2-hour fire barrier. My doors or my fire dampers in that wall, 1.5 hour. Can I have in my fire door, my 1.5 hour rated fire door, can I have a glass panel, a vision panel, so I can see through that door before I open the door into someone that's standing just on the other side? Yes, I can. Maximum 100 square inches. That fire rated glazing in that vision panel has to be rated. This is the ratings that we use now. 90 inches for its hose stream rated. It's rated for a door, tested and listed for door installation. It covers the hose stream requirement, and it's got 90 minutes. So this is the table that we go to. Here's my fire barriers with 1 hour construction. For an exit accessway or exit stairway or exit passageway, 1 hour construction. In this case, now I need 1 hour doors. I still have a limitation on the assemblies, the size of the assemblies, but this is the table that we would go to for each individual fire rated assembly to determine what's the rating of the doors. Are there limitations on the doors? Can I install doors, glazing in the doors? This is the table that we use for all types of fire rated construction. The openings in a fire barrier still limited to 156 square feet for a single opening, 25% aggregate for the overall length of the wall. However, there are some additional exceptions. The openings are not limited to 156 square feet if the building is sprinkled with NFPA 13. The openings are not limited to 156 square feet or the 25% of the aggregate width. Where the opening is a fire door in an interior exit stair exit ramp. My stair enclosure is 10 feet wide. And it's a 2-hour rated stair enclosure. So, but each wall is 10 feet in width. 25%. I get 2.5 feet for my door. Oh, wait a minute. No, our minimum width is going to be 3 feet. So I'm not limited to that in those exit enclosures. Not limited to 156 square feet or 25% where the opening protected is tested to ASTM E119 or UL 263. These standards test opening protectives, but this standard is designed to test it as equivalent to a wall. This is the same test we would use to test a 1-hour rated wall. If my opening protection complies with this test, and it is a more rigorous test, if it complies with that test, it's considered equivalent to the wall. And I'm not limited to any 156 square feet or the 25%. Opening is not limited to 25% in atriums. So we're going to have an atrium, and it's going to be mostly glass, not limited to 25%. Next step down, we had fire wall, fire barrier, now fire partition. Vertical assembly of materials, restrict the spread of fire. It's a fire partition. It has specific uses. I'm going to construct a rated corridor. I'm going to separate dwelling units or sleeping units. I'm going to separate tenant spaces in a covered mall. I'm going to construct an elevator lobby in a sprinkler building. So I have sprinklers and fire partitions. No sprinklers, it's a fire barrier. Separate tenant spaces in high rise. Tenant spaces in buildings of 1, 2A, 3A, 4, 5, or 5A construction of group A, E, H, I, L, and R 2.1 occupancies. I'm separating tenant spaces. Higher life hazard, protect the tenant spaces, and that is a requirement for those occupancies in that type of construction. Fire resistance rating of a fire partition has to be 1-hour construction. A fire partition doesn't ever go more than 1-hour construction. To go more than one, it could, but it's not required. Not required to be more than 1-hour construction. And it actually can be reduced to a half hour if I'm separating dwelling units and sleeping units, the type 2B, 3B, 5B construction. Okay, I'm separating dwelling units. Typically, we would use NFPA 13R sprinkler system. Now, if you want to reduce it to half hour, you got to use NFPA 13, which is a higher level of protection. No rating required in Group B tenant spaces. If the building's sprinkled, I go back here to tenant spaces in high rise, have to be separated. Nope. If a building's sprinkled in type 1 or type 2 construction, which a new high rise will be sprinkled, no requirement is required, or no fire rating is required for the fire partition. Can I have openings in a fire partition? Yes, I can. Fire partition, we're back to the same table, part of that same table. Fire partitions that are used as a corridor wall. And then I have everything else. The everything else requires a 45-minute rating on a door. Corridor wall, 20-minute. Corridor wall, 20 minutes. So I could have 20-minute glazing, 20-minute doors, vision panel. What's the maximum size it was tested to? Only has to be tested for 20 minutes, 20-minute rating. What size was it tested to? What size was it tested to? A 1 hour construction for my corridor. 1 hour construction for my, I'm sorry, not my corridor, my fire partitions. My fire partitions, although this would apply whether it's is a corridor or not a corridor, but in general, all fire partitions from the ceiling, floor ceiling below to the underside of whatever I have above, roof, ceiling, whatever it may be above, that's my fire partition. Just continuous on that floor level from floor to ceiling, from my foundation to the ceiling. I've got my drop ceiling in here, no fire rating, no fire rating. And there's several options here. Option 2, I'm going to go from my foundation to my fire resistance rated assembly. I'm going to stop at the bottom of that fire resistance rated assembly. My fire partition. Now I've got a situation where I've got a crawl space beneath. My fire partition can go from the 1 hour floor assembly to the roof or ceiling above. But it's continuous, separating from, I'm going to say left to right, or one side to the other. It's continuous to make that separation throughout that space. Fire partitions in a mall. They only have to go from the floor below to the ceiling above, not to the roof above or the floor assembly above, up to my drop ceiling, basically. That's the separation of tenant spaces that is required in both new construction and in existing builds. So I'm coming in for, I'm going to do a TI, or I'm going to create a new space. That's required. Does not need to continue up to the floor or roof above. Only has to go to the drop ceiling, and it's a non-rated drop ceiling. Corridor wall, some additional exceptions specific to corridors. I've got my 1 hour corridor wall, and I've got a 1 hour rated floor horizontal assembly above. I can have the exterior side go up to the assembly above, the interior side up here and across for the ceiling in that corridor, and then back down on the other side. Exterior, my drop ceiling, whatever ceiling, non-rated ceiling out there. But one way to look at this is for a fire to get from anywhere outside into the corridor, it has to pass through 2 layers of sheetrock of type X, 5/8 inch sheetrock. Fires out here, goes through 1, 2. So I still maintain that enclosure with that design. An option to that, and this only will apply in a sprinkler building, and if I have sprinklers inside the concealed space between the floor above or the roof above and the ceiling level. No sprinklers here, this does not work. But now my corridor wall comes up the wall, covers the ceiling and the other wall. I've got one layer in my corridor. I've got one layer on the exterior up to the non-rated floor ceiling assembly above, or whatever it is, the roof ceiling, floor ceiling. Nothing across the top. I'm using the sprinklers to provide the protection for this area here. This is an exception, and it does not apply to all fire partitions, only corridor walls. No fire resistance on that bottom side, nothing required at all. But the building is sprinklered. The building is sprinkled, not just sprinklers here. I've got sprinklers in the corridors. I've got sprinklers throughout the building. Another option for corridor construction. I've got my 1 hour fire partition that comes up, and basically I'm just going to turn it. My 1 hour comes down, and I've created essentially a tunnel inside the building. Did not go to the floor or roof construction above, but I've created a 1 hour separation between the corridor and the other spaces in the building. Non-rated ceilings outside, so nothing's required for those ceiling locations outside of that corridor. Let's go back here. Of course, any ventilation coming through here, penetrating this, I'm going to have fire and smoke damper installed. And we have also corridor dampers that are specific for corridor installation. Exterior walls. Exterior wall is the wall, the final outside wall of the building. Has a slope of 60 degrees or more from the horizontal plane. So it does not have to be a completely 90-degree vertical wall. It could be at a slope, but whatever essentially is the exterior of the building, that's our exterior wall. When does it need to be fire rated? Based on the fire separation distance. Fire separation distance is the distance from the building wall to a lot line. To a lot line. And the distance is measured at perpendicular to the wall face. To the wall face. So I'm not measuring 90 degrees from the property line. I'm measuring 90 degrees from the building. That's my fire separation distance. When I'm adjacent to a street, I go to the center line of the street. So the building on the north side of the street is going to the center line. The building on the south side of the street is going to the center line, essentially being equivalent to a property line between the two buildings, halfway, well, separating the buildings, not necessarily halfway. But I can have two buildings on the same piece of property. There's no lot line. I have an option as a designer. I treat it all as one building. So I would have an exterior wall here, exterior wall, and an exterior wall here and here. I wouldn't have to worry about this being an exterior wall and the separation distance of that wall, but I combine them and I treat it all as one building. I don't want to do that. I'm going to have to put an imaginary lot line in there somewhere, up to the designer's choice where this imaginary line occurs between these two buildings. Typically, it'll be placed wherever this imaginary lot line goes. This is my existing building. How far away does this imaginary lot line need to be so that there are no requirements on this wall? So this wall complies. That's my starting distance. Okay, now what's the distance here in my new construction? Now I design this wall to comply with the fire separation distance on that side. What are the requirements? If it's less than 5 feet, 3-hour wall for an H or L occupancy, 1-hour wall for most of the common occupancies, maybe 2 hours, but it's based on the distance, the separation in feet, the fire separation distance, and the type of construction, and the occupancy. So where we've been looking at what's the occupancy, now we're adding what's the type of construction. Type 1A, 1B, let's go to a B occupancy. B occupancy, type 1A, 1B, 1 hour. Type 2B, 5B, no rating. Everything else, 1 hour. Footnote C, open parking garages, don't have to worry about this as long as they comply with the open parking garage section. Once I get beyond 30 feet or 30 feet and beyond, there is no fire rating required. So not always required that the exterior wall has a fire rating. Even in type 1A construction, the wall, this is the wall, type 1A construction, the supporting columns, they will have a fire rating, but the wall surfacing, the wall between those columns, when I'm 40 feet away, has no requirement. But the structure holding the building up as 1A construction, it will have a requirement for that type of construction. Okay, so can I have openings in those walls? Can I have openings in those walls? In fire district number 1, the various areas in the jurisdiction that are classified as fire district number 1, other than provisional structures, all openings shall be protected where the separation distance is less than 10 feet. All openings shall be protected. So we'll talk about, do I need to protect the openings? I built my 1 hour wall. Can I have openings in that? That's what we're getting to. So I had to protect all of them in fire district number 1. In other situations, there's a table that we'll look at. It tells us, yeah, maybe you have to protect them. Maybe. Not always required. And we'll look at the percentage of the exterior wall area. When we look at this table, it's based on the area of the exterior wall per story. So I look at the height of the story and that exterior wall. What's that area? How many openings can I have in there? Second floor, I repeat that. Third floor, I repeat that. Per story. Other than H, unlimited openings are allowed on the first story. Unlimited, unprotected openings. No protection, unlimited openings. If the wall faces a street where the fire separation distance is greater than 15 feet. If the wall faces an unoccupied space, 30 feet or more in width. Or unlimited openings are allowed where the exterior wall does not require a fire resistance rating. Where the exterior wall does not require fire resistance rating, I don't have to protect openings. So here's my table, 705.8. And it looks at the fire separation distance. What's the distance to basically to the exposure? What level of protection will be provided? And it has unprotected openings. Unprotected openings, UPNS, unprotected, not sprinkled. Unprotected openings in buildings not equipped throughout with a sprinkler system accordance with 903.3.1.1, which is the requirement for NFPA 13 again. So it's an unprotected opening. There's no sprinklers. There's no fire rated on the opening protective. Unprotected sprinklered. I have an unprotected opening. It's not a fire rated opening, a door glazing. It's not fire rated, but the building is sprinklered with NFPA 13. Last option, it is a listed opening protective. So it's fire rated door, fire rated glazing, whichever, either one, that's my protected opening. So let's just take a look at, let's assume my building is, well, I'm 5 feet from the property line, 5 feet to less than 10. Building is not sprinklered. I only get 10% of the wall area. In the fire barrier, the fire wall, we looked at a percentage of the width. Now we're looking at the entire area. How big a hole are we putting into this fire rated exterior wall? 10%. It's not protected opening, but it's sprinklered, 25%. It's a protected opening, and the protected opening does not matter if it's sprinklered or not. So basically I'm looking at, it's either sprinklered or it's protected, and I get 25% of the area of that wall. When I have to protect the openings, what rating is required? Fire window assemblies. In a 1 hour wall, 45-minute rated. Fire door, in a 1 hour wall, 45-minute rated for this exterior wall. This is exterior wall requirements. More than 1 hour, hour and a half rating on the glazing, hour and a half rating on the doors. But I may have openings in that wall that some are protected and some are not protected. That can be a design option. So we have a little fancy equation that we look at to determine what's the allowed area, because they had different percentage allotments. And all that this equation does, it looks more complicated than it is. I've got two numbers. I'm going to divide, add them together. Is it less than 1, or does it exceed 1? All we have to do is get the right numbers to plug into this equation to solve it. So I have a sub P, the actual area of protected openings. What's the actual area? What are we planning or proposing to put in that wall? Divided by what's the allowable area of protected openings. We're just going to figure a proportion. They were allowed 100 square feet and they used 30% of that. Then I have unprotected openings. We're doing the same thing. What's my actual area and what's my allowed area? For unprotected openings, they were allowed 30 square feet and they used, excuse me, 30% of that. My 30% and my 30%, I add them up. It's less than 100. It's less than 1. That works. Let's go through that for a minute here. Here's my exterior wall. And remember, when we're looking at the exterior wall, openings in exterior wall, we do floor by floor. So we look at one story at a time. In this exterior wall, I have a 1 hour requirement for that wall. Building's not sprinklered and I'm 8 feet from the property line. I've got a 4x8 window and it has a 45-minute rating on it. I've got a exterior door with a 45-minute rating on it. I've got some other glazing that, you know what, it's not rated. It's just regular glazing. And I've got some exhaust fans with that exhaust through that wall. 12 by 12 opening, and it's not protected. There's no fire damper in that opening. So the question is, have I exceeded my allotment or not? And I've got a mix of protected and unprotected openings. We have to look at what's the whole wall. For that story, I've got 40 feet by 10 feet. I've got 400 square feet. How many unprotected openings do I have? Unprotected, protected, I've got 32 feet for the glazing, and I've got 21 feet for the fire door. I've got 53 square feet. Unprotected openings, I've got 2 ventilation openings, 1 square foot apiece, and I've got a 4 by 4 window, 16 square feet. So those are my openings. Now the question is, how does it fit into that equation? So we're going to look at what's my actual area protected openings. My actual area was 53 square feet protected openings. What's my allowable area of protected openings? We got to go back to our table. 8 feet away. Protected openings, 25%. Unprotected openings, 10%. So I have my protected openings at 25% of the area and my unprotected at 10% of the area. So for my allowable area of protected openings, I get 25% of 400 or 100 square feet. What's the actual area of unprotected openings? Well, we came up with 18 feet. The actual area of, or the allowable area of unprotected openings. Now we have 10% times 400 or 40. And all we have to do is solve that equation. We get 0.53 plus 0.45, and we come up with a number that does not exceed 1. It's allowed. It's allowed. If I exceed 1, we go back to the designer and say, hey, you exceeded 1, you got to comply. Options, reduce the size of the glazing. My 4 by 4 window, put in fire rated glazing. So we have other options. The designer has options to do that. But in this case, it worked. But we repeat this for every floor level, every story, on each side of the building, but only where the exterior wall is required to be fire rated based on the fire separation distance. Smoke barriers. Everything we've talked about so far, we're stopping the spread of fire. We may also stop the spread of smoke. Now we're talking about stopping the spread of smoke. The focus now is stopping the spread of smoke. It may also stop the spread of fire, or at least slow it, but we're more concerned about the spread of smoke in the facility. Continuous membrane, vertical or horizontal. Designed and constructed to restrict the movement of smoke. Doesn't say it completely stops it. It's going to restrict it, slow it down, limit the spread of smoke. Smoke barrier. Smoke barrier. 1 hour fire resistance rating. So this smoke barrier stops the spread of smoke and has a fire resistance rating on it. Smoke barriers are used to divide a building into different smoke compartments. We see this in Group I and some Group R occupancies where we need separate smoke compartments. Resist the spread of fire and smoke. Supporting construction, not required, even though I have a 1 hour fire barrier, essentially. Not required to have supporting construction meet the fire resistance rating requirement. if it's type 2B, 3B, 5B construction. Let's go back and talk about that just a second. If it's type 2A, 3A, 5A construction, the type of construction is going to require that it's 1 hour already. So that's why these are the only ones that are excluded. It's already got to have, if it's a different type of construction, it's going to have the 1 hour rating. Smoke barrier continuity, complete effective member to seal off the spread of smoke from one area or one room to others, including concealed spaces. So my floor ceiling assembly above my smoke barrier has to continue through that space. Outside wall to outside wall. I do not include the exterior wall. The exterior wall has no requirement when we're looking at a smoke containment. If the smoke goes through that exterior wall, hey, great, it's not trapped in the building. But no requirement to seal that wall or protect that wall for fire rating or for smoke containment. Typical uses: areas of refuge and elevator lobbies. And when I'm using that, my smoke barrier has to provide a complete separation, so it continues either to another smoke barrier, to an exterior wall, or to a fire barrier. It can stop at a fire barrier with 1 hour or greater rating. We're going to stop the spread of smoke. If I'm using it in a building that typically high rise that has smoke pressurization for smoke control in the building, there are additional requirements in Chapter 9 that deal with the smoke control as far as the installation. Can I have openings in my smoke barrier? 1 hour smoke barrier. All I need is a 20-minute door. The intent of a smoke barrier is not to stop the spread of fire. I need a 20-minute door. It does have to be rated, just like we would use in a corridor, but it's a 20-minute door. And the doors will have this symbol on it, which indicates it's been tested and it meets the smoke opening protective to be used in a smoke barrier door. I still have to install gaskets. I still have to meet the installation requirements, but that indicates it's designed and been tested as a smoke barrier door. 1 hour smoke barrier. I'm going to put an 1.5 hour damper, 1.5 hour fire and smoke damper in it, because that's the lowest rating we have for a fire damper. But so I'm putting that in my 1 hour wall. Doors and smoke barriers shall be 45-minute rated. Wait, we just said 20-minute. Yeah, but if it's a elevator lobby for a fire service access elevator, or an elevator lobby for an occupant evacuation elevator, they're required to have 45-minute. 45-minute rated door with the smoke rating on it, 45-minute rated minimum for those elevator lobbies. That's not all elevator lobbies. My fire service access elevator, 125 feet or higher. Smoke partitions. Take another step down. Smoke partitions. A wall assembly, wall only, that extends from the top of foundation or floor below to the underside of the roof, sheeting, deck, ceiling above, where it's designed to limit the transfer of smoke. No fire resistance rating required. So all I want to do is contain the smoke, keep it from spreading. I can use smoke partitions in an elevator lobby for non-high-rise building if the building's sprinklered. If the building's sprinklered. My smoke partition. Windows are sealed to resist the passage of smoke. So I've installed my windows and I've caulked the openings. All doors, self-closing, automatic closing. No fire rating required. Doors shall not include louvers, so I don't have ventilation through the door. I have to meet the installation requirements. Gaps around penetrations. So I've had penetrations in that smoke partition. Maybe piping running through or conduit running through that smoke partition. I fill the gap around the penetrating item and the wall itself with an approved material. Does not have to have a fire resistance rating on it. It may be some type of caulking. It may just be compound, joint compound for the wall finish. If I have ducts and air transfer openings, do I need to protect them? I have to fill around the exterior, the perimeter, when that duct penetrates the wall. Do I need a smoke damper? And this is not a fire smoke damper, only a smoke damper required in high-rise and AE, HI, L, and R occupancies. In all other occupancies, if it's an air transfer opening, I'm just moving air from one side of the fire partition to the other side. Maybe no ductwork. Or there may be a duct that comes down to the ceiling on each side. But if it's an air transfer opening, I have to have a smoke damper. If it's just ductwork running through the building, seal around the perimeter. So we're just trying to slow the spread of smoke throughout the building. One other type of fire resistance rated construction: horizontal assemblies. Horizontal assemblies. It's a fire resistance rated floor ceiling assembly or roof assembly. If it's not a fire rated assembly, it is referred to as a floor ceiling assembly or a roof assembly. Whenever the code uses the term horizontal assembly, it is a fire rated assembly. By definition, it's a fire rated assembly. So anytime we have a horizontal assembly, all the supporting construction has to have at least the same fire resistance rating as the horizontal assembly. Fire resistance rating, what's required? We're going to go back and look at the same tables we looked at before. And the question is, what are you doing? Why are we having a horizontal assembly? Am I separating occupancies, creating fire areas, separating dwelling units, creating a smoke compartment, or is it an incidental use? What's the purpose? That will determine what's the fire rating. What's the fire rating? In a dwelling unit, in my R occupancy, I'm separating dwelling units or sleeping units. So it's got to be 1 hour. Could be only a half hour rated in type 2B, 3B, 5B construction if it's sprinklered with NFPA 13. Again, we're back into a potentially residential facility where NFPA 13R may be applicable. If I use NFPA 13R, I need a 1 hour assembly. If I use NFPA 13, I can reduce it to a half hour horizontal assembly. And there are times when the ceiling is part of the tested horizontal assembly. It could be part of it. It's not required to be part of it, but it could be part of it. And if it is, then the ceiling panels are certain design panels, the tested panels. And when they are installed, it's critical to look at the installation of those panels. Is the panel, does it require hold down clips? The hold down clip is required if the panel is not heavy enough to stay in place during a fire event. As we have a fire, we're going to create heat, and that heat is going to rise. It's going to push up. We're going to create pressure. As we heat things up, things expand. So we're going to heat and pressure wanting to escape that room. And it is possible without proper installation that that panel is going to be dislodged. Now I have an opening into the interstitial space within that horizontal assembly. So the hold down clip or the weight of the panel has to be designed properly to prohibit that from occurring during the fire event. Vertical openings. I'm going to use fire-rated construction for vertical openings, whether it is a elevator shaft, whether it is a stair enclosure, whether it is a atrium. I'm going to have fire resistance rating for that vertical shaft depending on how many floors are connected with that vertical opening. So here's my vertical opening. In this case, I've got 1, 2, 3. There's actually a 4th floor above that are connected by a vertical opening. The vertical opening in this case is an atrium, but it could be a pipe shaft, a ventilation shaft, a stair enclosure. That's my vertical opening. And we have requirements for those vertical openings anytime they connect 2 or more stories. The one allowance is in a dwelling unit, and I connect no more than 4 stories. I don't have to comply with that. I can have an escalator. The escalator itself creates a vertical opening connecting 2 floors together or more. So I can have escalator openings between stories if the building's sprinklered and I comply with either of 2 sections of the code. One says install sprinklers around the opening, create a soffit around the perimeter of the opening with sprinklers located just on the other side of that. So here's the edge of my soffit with a sprinkler on the exterior side. And as the sprinkler operates, the water spray is going to hit that soffit and then fall, creating essentially a water curtain, separating the opening from the remainder of the floor. One option. Option 2, put a fire shutter across the top of the opening. Basically, I'm going to put a fire shutter that would come at this upper floor level and seal off that entire area. It would come out to the end of the escalator, wrap down to the floor. That is an option. One or the other is required. When I'm in an atrium, and this is a table that there's no table number here because this is not a table that's in the code. This is a table that's in your handout. I have an atrium, and we have atriums. We have a number of allowances or requirements for atriums, depending on which type occupancy the atrium is located in. When I have an atrium, I've created a vertical opening, so I've created a vertical opening. What's the big deal? I'm going to have smoke and heat from floor levels below traveling up to the upper floors and impacting the life safety of those occupants on the upper floors, the visibility on the upper floors. Uh, there's been a number of fires where a fire occurs on a bottom floor and the smoke traveled up to the upper floors. Now it can't get out of the building, so it accumulates on the upper floors. And we have fatalities on those upper floors because of the smoke. No fire, but because of the smoke and heat that's trapped in there. So do I separate the atrium with 1 hour construction? Maybe, depending on the number of floors and the occupancy classification. I'm in an I2 occupancy if I'm connecting 2 or more stories. Oh, that's kind of, if I'm not connecting 2 stories, I don't have a vertical opening. So basically what this saying is for an I2, all of them, 1 hour separation between the atrium and the remainder of the floor. Do I need smoke control in the atrium? All of them. Does it have to be sprinklered? Essentially, I can't have an atrium without a sprinkler system. Do I need to have a fire alarm? And the way the code is written, it's a little confusing, but what it means is you need a fire alarm to control the smoke management system. Do I need smoke control? Basically exhaust. I need a fire alarm or fire detection system to determine when to turn the system on. When to turn the system on. Fire atrium is not allowed in Group H occupancies. Not allowed at all in Group H occupancies. But there are times when I can have my atrium says more than 3 stories. I've got a B occupancy, more than 3 stories, and I want to have a glass atrium so we can see out into the atrium. Oh, I need 1 hour glazing. Or footnote A, fire barrier not required for a glass wall is a smoke partition. And I have sprinklers along both sides of that glass partition. Again, we're using the water to essentially create a water curtain running down the face of that glass. 2-story openings. And other than I2, 2.1, and I3, I can connect 2 stories. In an I2, 2.1, and I3, anytime I connect 2 stories, I have to treat it as a vertical opening. Other occupancies, I don't worry about it. Long as it's not concealed in construction, long as it's not open directly to a corridor in Group I or Group R, long as it's not open directly to a corridor in an unsprinklered building. The vertical opening is separated by fire dampers, and it's not penetrating a horizontal assembly. If that floor level is a horizontal assembly, a fire rated assembly, I just put a hole in it. Now I have to protect it. Now I have to protect it. In other than Group I2, 2.1, I3, and R2.1, unprotected floor openings are allowed if they only serve 2 stories. Okay, we just looked at those 2 stories. Or it's within a dwelling unit for Group R. Or congregate residence, Group R3, or Group R4, or in buildings that are sprinkled with NFPA 13 and the sprinkler design complies with section 1019.3. Oh, wow. I love it when the code does that. Okay, so now what does 1019.3 say? It's and this is allowed for exit access stairways. This was, I'm protecting my exit access stairway or ramp I'm creating a vertical opening in the building. I have an exit access stairway. This is not the exit. This is not the exit. I can do that. We're going to put an 18-inch deep soffit or draft curtain around the perimeter and add sprinklers beyond that around the perimeter. We're essentially going to create the same protection scheme that we use for escalators. Escalators are allowed to connect an unlimited number of floors in a B occupancy or an N occupancy. Therefore, this can also, this design, this level of protection. In other than B or M occupancy, I can have a maximum of 4 floors. Keep in mind, this is an exit access stairway. Up on the 4th floor, I need 2 exits. This cannot be one of them. This would be an additional or a convenience stair. So in my exit, I just said I need 2 exits up on those upper floors. So I'm going to have, here's my stair enclosure, here's my atrium, here's my ventilation shaft, here's my elevator shaft that I'm constructing in the building. I've got, let's see, I've got 3 stories with 2 mezzanines. The requirement is that when I connect 4 stories or more, I have to have a 2-hour rated shaft enclosure. Less than that can be 1 hour. So the question is, do these mezzanines count as a story? No, they don't. So this would be a 3-story building. I'm connecting 3 stories. I need a 1-hour fire resistance rated shaft. I add 1 more story. I need 4. I need 2-hour fire resistance rated, with or without the mezzanines. The mezzanines are not a story. They are part of the story that they are found within. So now I need 2-hour rated shaft enclosure, or whatever the fire resistance rating is of the floor, if it's greater. If this penetrates a 3-hour rated horizontal assembly, this then has to have a 3-hour rating. So now I've got a 3-story building with a basement. I am connecting 4 stories with my shaft. It has to have a 2-hour rating. It has to have a 2-hour rating. Doesn't matter if it's above ground, below ground. The question is, how many stories are connected with that shaft? 4 stories here, 2 hours shaft required. Can I have openings in that shaft? Well, it's my stair enclosure. I'm going to have doors. It's my elevator. I'm going to have doors. So I do have openings. Penetrations and openings not necessary for the purpose of the shaft are not permitted. So what this is saying is, I've got my stair enclosure, and I've got to run I've got a female restroom and a male restroom, one on each side of my stair enclosure. I got to get water from one side to the other. I cannot go through the shaft enclosure because it's not necessary for what's going on within that shaft. I have to go around. So we're not allowing penetrations of that fire rated wall that don't need to be there. We're providing a higher level of protection. If it doesn't have to penetrate that wall, don't penetrate that wall. Hour and a half rated for 2 hour, 1 hour rated for my shaft, now, shaft enclosure, 1 hour opening protectives in a 1 hour rated shaft wall. Here's my trash chute. I've got a 7-story building. Here's my trash chute. First question, 1 hour, 2 hour. I've connected more than 4 stories. It's 2 hour rated. Inside that trash chute, now I have sprinklers, both in the shaft itself and in the termination room. Up on the upper levels, I've got a trash chute room. I cannot just act, this opening into the trash chute is not in the corridor. Corridor is out here. So I construct a room that the user has to enter this room and then access the trash chute through this opening here. So I've got a chute access room, which is 1 hour construction. Even though this is a 2 hour shaft, 1 hour construction. 45-minute rated door. I've got a 2 hour shaft. I've got 1.5 hours opening protective on this shaft. The opening into the shaft is also protected. This room at the bottom of the shaft, if it's open to the shaft, which typically it is, has to be at least the same type of level of fire resistance rating as the shaft itself. Hoistway, elevator hoistway. I'm going to put my elevator in a shaft. Wait a minute, for the shaft, we said, well, you had to protect the openings. Yep, you do. Okay, so do I have to protect the elevator hoistway openings? It's required when I connect more than 2 stories. More than 2 stories. So I'm connecting only 2 stories in these occupancies. I don't have to worry about it. More than 2 stories, I have to protect the openings. More than 3 stories in all other occupancies that are not sprinklered. High-rise building, all of them. I don't have to protect the openings in an open parking garage or the openings at the level of exit discharge. So I go at the first floor, I walk into the building and I've just got an open elevator bank. I don't have to protect those openings at that level. If that level's sprinklered and it's NFPA 13 system. 13R, I would have to provide protection for those openings in the hoistway. So what kind of protection do I provide? How do I protect that opening? Because in my shaft, I have to provide both smoke and fire protection. And the door on the elevator door, not the lobby doors here, but the elevator door can provide the 1.5 hour rating for fire. It can't provide the rating for smoke control. There's a 1/2 inch gap all around that door. It can't provide the rating for smoke control. So how do I provide the smoke control? I create a lobby. And now my smoke gets past the elevator door, but it's trapped in that elevator lobby. So I create a lobby, 1 hour lobby with 20-minute doors. Either self-closing, which means every time you walk through the door, you release it, it closes automatically. It closes by itself. Or automatic closing, doors which are held open with a magnet and smoke detector activates to release and close the doors. Those are automatic closing, but they have to be rated. If the building is sprinklered with NFPA 13 or 13R, I can use smoke partitions to create my lobby. Smoke partition, no fire rating required. Smoke partition. So all I have is smoke rated doors. I construct my lobby. I fill all the gaps and penetrations, and I'm okay. No fire rating. Let me go back here just a second. No fire rating until I get to high rise. Once I get to high rise, things step up a little bit. I add doors. Here's my elevator door with the 1.5-hour fire rating. Here's my door. It's a hoistway opening door, often referred to as a slam door. It closes upon activation of a smoke detector. Here's my magnetic hold open device. It closes, and I have a gasket around the three sides of the door. We don't worry about the floor, but around the three sides of the door frame, I've got a gasket that provides my smoke control. Key thing. This side of the door, the elevator side of the door, has to have a handle on it. I've seen many installations where they only provided the handle, the release lever on the exterior side. What happens when the elevator comes up to that point and you need to get out, or the firefighters are using it? They need to be able to open that door, or an occupant. So I have to have it has to close and latch like any door, but I have to have a latch on the door on the elevator side also. And other than group I2, I can use hoistway pressurization. In other words, I'm going to pressurize the elevator shaft. I'm going to pump air into it. I'm going to take into account we're going to have leaks, and we want those leaks. And as that air leaks out around the elevator door, it's rushing out, and the smoke cannot enter. That is hoistway pressurization. Only allowed if you approve it. Hoistway door opening with a listed smoke containment system. Here's my listed smoke containment system. It normally is rolled up in, and this comes up to the top, and this flap closes, and it's concealed. Smoke detector activate, it deploys, and it's just a simple magnet that attaches to this metal frame out here that holds it closed. You're inside the elevator, you come out, it's just a magnet. You push it open, you can step out, it closes behind you. It's a listed system. Acceptable until we get to high rise. At high rise, I have to build the lobby. I have to build the lobby. 1 hour construction. I have to build the lobby. The opening protectives, fire doors. Opening protectives are the fire rated components that are going to fill the openings in the wall or the floor ceiling assembly or the horizontal assembly to provide protection for the openings. Fire dampers and smoke dampers. Where are they required? I have ducts penetrating my firewall. If it's allowed, if I can have openings in that firewall, I've got ducts penetrating my firewall, I need a fire damper. It's a horizontal exit. I need a fire damper and a smoke damper. It's a shaft enclosure. I need a fire damper and a smoke damper. Fire partition, only a fire damper. It's a corridor. We have specific dampers that are designed for corridor installation. One's a corridor damper, one is a ceiling radiation damper. And what makes the difference is how the ductwork is run to that damper, to that opening. Does it penetrate both layers of sheetrock, or only one? Is it running in the interstitial space between my two layers of protection? It depends how the ductwork is installed, which one is appropriate. But this will tell you, and every smoke damper is activated by a smoke detector. So I need a smoke detector either in the ductwork or in the entire area served by the ductwork. All of the dampers require access into the duct to reset, to maintain, to repair, to inspect the damper during the life of the building. So we're going to have an access panel in the ductwork to get to them. My shaft enclosure, I need both fire and smoke damper. My fire resistance rated glazing. We have two types of glazing. Fire resistance rated and fire protection rated. The easiest way to remember this is if I have a wall, it has a fire resistance rating. If I have glazing with a fire resistance rating, it is equivalent to the wall. It's gone through the same test. My fire barrier is tested under ASTM E119 or UL 263, and the glazing has gone through the same test, E119 or UL 263. In other words, it's equivalent to a wall. There's no limitation on size. We're not limited to size. It could be the entire wall, but it's got the same rating as that wall. All of the glazing now that is fire rated, whether fire protection or fire resistance, is going to have laser etching in the corner of the component. Tells you which test standard, tells you what's the rating is in minutes. So it's going to be 60 minutes. The W means it's equivalent to a wall rating 60. This one would say it's in we'll pick a 1 hour wall. W-60 to be the right glazing for here. If it says D-60, it's not fire resistance rated. D means it's designed to be in a door, goes to a different test standard, because my door is fire protection rated. This is an opening protective. It's protecting that opening. 1 hour wall, maybe 45-minute door. 1 hour wall in a corridor, 20-minute door. So it depends on what that rating is, but the glazing could be fire resistance rated or fire protection rated. We go back to the same table to determine what door rating we need. Can I have glazing in the door? Can I have a vision panel in the door? This is different than the fire resistance rating. Different than the fire resistance rating, but we're back to what assembly, what's the rating on the wall? Here's my door rating. Here's my fire barrier. I've got a 2 hour fire barrier. I need an 1.5 hour door. The door could have 100 square inches of glass in it. The the glazing would say DH90. I can use more than 100 square inches if it is DHW90. W, it's rated as a wall. It's rated as a wall. It's equivalent to the wall. 90 minutes. So the smoke and draft control for fire door and corridors and smoke barriers, they have to meet the smoke and draft control door assembly. requirements, which is a different test standard. There's a test standard for the fire rating and a test standard for the smoke control. I can't provide louvers in the door. I can't, it says installation course with NFPA 105. Biggest thing to just, you can do this, look on every fire door. If it's got more than a 3/4 inch gap at the bottom of the door, it is not right. 3/4 inch gap at the bottom is the maximum for a fire door or a smoke door. Maximum at the bottom, 3/4 inch gap. If it's a smoke barrier door where I'm creating smoke compartments in a building, it can have a 3/4 inch gap, and it's also going to have an artificial barrier that as the door closes, I've got another gasket or that drops down and seals to the floor. That's only required where I'm creating a smoke barrier for a smoke compartment in a building. But here's a label on a door. My fire rating, 3/4 hour door, manufacturer, the approved agency that's testing. Manufacturer, 3/4 hour, what other information is appropriate, tells you what it's tested to, the test standard, and this one has a smoke rating on it. Now even though the door is listed, it still has to be installed properly. It still has to meet the installation requirements that are part of the listing. I'm going to put glazing in that door. I cannot take this door and put it in a building and I'm going to modify it. I'm going to cut it in half and create a Dutch door. No, it's a listed door, don't modify it. So when I buy a listed door and I want glazing in it, it comes with the glazing. I want a Dutch door that has to be fire rated in my corridor. They make them. They are listed doors that are designed as a Dutch door and meet the smoke and fire requirements. They're available. Don't modify them. They're not allowed to modify them. It's a listed component. Okay, there's one other concept in the code, section 722, that allows you to calculate the fire resistance. There are several tables in the code that tell you, okay, we decided we needed a 4-hour firewall. And there's a whole table that says, here's some ways to make that 4-hour firewall or a 3-hour firewall. And there's different options. It's poured in place concrete. It's CMU. Did I grout it solid? Or it's steel studs with sheetrock, or it's wood studs with sheetrock. Depending on the fire rating you're looking for and the type of construction, there's a number of options already prescribed in the code. But there are other times when, especially in an existing building, I'm going to look at what's the rating on that wall. We now changed the layout of this, and that needs to be a 1-hour wall for the corridor. Is it equivalent to a 1-hour wall? And you can calculate the fire resistance. You can calculate the fire resistance outside of what's on that table. And there's several ways. It depends. How is it constructed? And there's a whole section for concrete masonry, brick, steel, and wood. And I'm just going to take a little bit of this. We're going to look at this in a second. We're going to, how does this work? And we'll examine a wood wall. But there are times when I have a non-symmetric wall construction. Otherwise, one side is different than the other side. And it's a rated wall. How do we know which rating counts? There are walls in that listing, in section 721 in the book, that say it's constructed this way on one side, this way on the other side. and it passes. But essentially, if I take that wall to a testing laboratory, they're going to test it from both sides. Flip it around, test it again. Whichever was the worst case is the rating that it gets. And when we're looking at this calculated method of resistance, we look at the worst case. Which is the worst case? And here's my non-symmetrical wall. I've got wood studs, one layer of 5/8 type X on one side, 1/2 inch backer board on the other side with 1/4 inch ceramic tile and 3.5 inches of mineral fiber installation. It's non-symmetrical. It's not the same on one side as it is on the other side. Chapter 7 says, hey, whatever is the worst case is what that rating will be. This wall is actually listed in section 721, and it's a 1-hour wall. It's a 1-hour wall. Tested from either side, it gets a 1-hour rating. But it's a non-symmetrical wall. So we're going to take our existing building and we're going to look at how do we do this with wood. First thing, when we're calculating the fire resistance, it's limited to 1 hour maximum. The calculations are good to 1 hour. Beyond that, maybe not. But as far as the calculations are concerned, we're limited to 1 hour maximum. And there's a table. It says here's my I'm going to use wood studs and I'm going to finish it. Here's different finishing materials and their corresponding fire resistance rating. I get 5/8 inch type X gypsum board. I only get 40 minutes. But remember, it's on both sides. It's on both sides. So these are based on framing members not more than 16 inches on center. Membrane on the unexposed side. So I'm gonna when I look at this, I look at a fire attacking one side of that wall. What's the wall finish? What's the wall construction? And I don't count the other side. Then I have to look at a fire from the other side. Is it the same or is it different? And whichever is weaker is the rating that it gets. So here's a second table that deals with the wall, the construction. It's wood studs, maximum 16 on center. I get 20 minutes just because it's a wood stud wall. Floor or roof joists, maximum 16 on center. I get 10 minutes. So here's how this works. Here's my wall. I've got wood studs. I've got 1/2 inch gypsum board, not even type X. 2 layers on each side. Hey, that doesn't meet the listing in the table. Go get it tested, or we can calculate it. So how do we calculate it? We say, okay, we got to look at the wood studs. What do the wood studs give us? We go back here and say wood studs, maximum 16 inch on center, 20 minutes. So I get 20 minutes. Okay. The gypsum board. What do I get for that? I go back here to this table and I have double 1/2 inch gypsum wallboard, 40 minutes. Wait, double 1/2 inch gypsum wallboard is equivalent to 1 layer of 5/8 type X gypsum wallboard. It's also 40 minutes. Okay, so I got 40 minutes on that wall. So my gypsum board is 40 minutes. I've got 60 minutes. So we take one side, we assume fire coming from one side, 2 layers of 1/2 inch, wood studs, We don't worry about this side, but then we look back, and in case it's a non-symmetrical wall, we have to look at this side also. 2 layers of 1/2 inch wood studs. So it's 60 minutes from either side. There's a 1 hour wall. There's a 1 hour wall. When could this be useful? I've got an existing building with 1/2 inch sheetrock wood studs. I need to turn it into a 1 hour wall. I can add a 1/2 inch sheetrock on top of it. I just created a 1 hour wall. So it could be useful in that situation. But there's in section 722, it goes through the same process, evaluating steel construction, concrete construction. Do I have a concrete wall and a layer of sheetrock on top? What's my rating? And you can calculate those ratings. Okay, well, we made it through. We made it through. This was actually a very quick run on chapter 7. There's a lot of information in chapter 7. A very quick run on chapter 7. So if you are there any questions?
Hi, Kevin. It's in the chat box. If you open
Okay.
it in the bottom. There's some thread there, but I think the first question is coming from John.
Okay. Chris, I see a question says, if you have an office building, type B occupancy, over a parking garage, if they propose a gym, A3, at the portion of the parking garage, what would the separation be required between the gym and the parking garage? Building is fully sprinkled. Okay, so my first question is it a podium building? You didn't say that, so we'll see. So let's go to our code. And we need section 508.4. Separation, I have an A and an S1. My parking garage is an S1. And was it sprinklered? If you have a parking garage, propose a gym. Building is fully sprinklered. Okay, building is fully sprinklered. I have a gym and a parking garage fully sprinklered. It's a 1 hour separation between the gym and the remainder of the parking garage. Okay, now, is it also podium construction? Can I do this if it's podium construction? There's a podium at the top of the parking garage before the B occupancy above. I still can do that. The separation between the A and the B occupancy above, where normally it would be A and B, still says 1 hour. No, it's podium construction. That stays at 3 hours. But all I have to do is separate the portion below. And in podium construction, the portion below can be any occupancy other than group H. So it's not group H. It was S1. Now we're just going to add an A. This can be done with a 1 hour separation. Okay. Are fire shutters allowed as hoistway protection in high-rise buildings in lieu of a 1 hour lobby? No. High-rise requires 1 hour or requires a lobby. When I get to high-rise, I have to have a lobby. The lobby is used for egress and for firefighting access, but I have to have the lobby. I cannot substitute the fire shutters or the smoke curtain or smoke guard. I cannot use any of those options that we talked about. I have to have a lobby. And I see that Risa added to it, the gym is everyone in the gym in the parking area. Yes, okay, maybe I wasn't clear. This 1 hour separation here is between the gym, the A3, and the parking facility, which is an S1. 1 hour, it's sprinklered, 1 hour separation is required between the gym and the parking area. Yes. If that did not answer your question specifically, Risa, throw something else in there. But there's a lot of information that we covered, and in fact, your question based on, okay, well, now it's 1 hour. I go back to, what do I construct that 1 hour as? Firewall, fire partition. My occupancy separations have to be a minimum of a fire barrier. So I'd go back to my fire barrier. Whoops. Okay, section 706.1.1, party wall. Exception 2, dividing building at lot lines, not required to be firewall nor party walls, meeting easement requirements. Okay. This is a new exception in the 2020 building code. And it was intended to go in to allow that the firewall is not required on a property line as long as the entire building complies with height and area requirements. And that is allowed. So if I don't have to have a firewall, it's just a wall separating the building, but I've treated the whole building as one building. So now we're just basically building one building across a property line. Essentially, they've built a building, and they essentially have created one piece of property, or one complex, shall we say. It says that to allow this to happen, the code official has to receive documents specifying that there's dedicated access or a contractual agreement between the two owners. And this is for maintenance. We've got one building. We did not put a firewall in. If we did, it'd be a party wall with no openings. But we didn't put a firewall in. We've agreed, both owners have agreed to do this. One building, one sprinkler riser, one fire alarm panel in one side of on one property. What that agreement is intended to say is, so as I come in, I need to work on the sprinkler system on my side. The risers on the other property. That agreement allows access over there to control the sprinkler system for maintenance, whether it be sprinklers, whether it be the gas line, whether it be plumbing, whether it be main electrical panel for the building. It's for maintenance and ongoing use in the future to ensure that the one owner still can do all the maintenance that's required for their property. Does it mean that no law? Yeah, it's considered, who was this? John, it's considered one building, and there is not, there is no restriction on openings. I could have openings. It's not a firewall. It's not a party wall. It's just open. But I have a contractual agreement allowing access and service on both sides of that wall. A basement is considered, Alan asked, would a basement be considered a story? A basement is a story. How do I know that? Because let's go to the definition of story. I think that's where it's at. Story above grade plane. Okay, story is the portion between the floor and the ceiling above. Okay, we got to go to basement. But a basement is considered a story. So when I have my 3-story building with a basement, there we go. Portion of sub of is a its floor subgrade on all sides. Oh, for flood loads. Wait a minute. Basement, a story that is not a story above grade plane, which has its own definition. So yes, a basement is a story. So when we're looking at how many levels my shaft is connecting, a basement or multiple basement levels are considered stories. Okay, any other questions, comments? I think, okay, Maria, all yours.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Kevin Scott, for a very informative webinar. I would also like to thank each and every one of our participants for joining us today. With that, I'm closing the seminar now. Thanks again, and have a wonderful rest of the day.